everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I'm delighted today to have the opportunity to have a conversation with the awesome Samantha Stein, known here on YouTube as Yo Samdy Sam. Hi, Sam. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Ella. Nice to talk to you finally. It's been a long time, I think.
It has been a while. I think you've been busy having a small baby,
Something about making a child, yeah.
making a child. Yeah, I mean, it's inconsiderate, but it's fine. And we finally get to chat again. It's really great to
Yeah.
see you. And in the meantime, you've obviously brought out a workbook, which we'll get to talking about a little bit later. But I thought we'd start by talking about um, autistic traits. I think that it can be hard to look at the diagnostic criteria for autism and apply that to a real life human and how that might present. And I know that one of the important aspects of your book is kind of working through how to make that connection with yourself. So I thought that we could start by me asking, can you talk a little bit about how autistic traits could potentially present in a less obvious way in an actual human being?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about the diagnostic criteria is that when you read it, it kind of sounds like you're reading about an alien, not a human being. So I think that there's kind of almost like a purposeful alienation the way that it's written. And so a lot of what I really like to do is to break that down for people. The thing that people think of as really obvious autistic traits are it's really just the tip of the iceberg. So people might have an idea about stimming, for example, and there's I know there's a million different kinds of ways that you can stim, and somehow only the kind of more obvious or extreme ones seem to be counted by mainstream media as being autistic enough. So for example, um, a lot of autistic people might rock. I actually find myself, I rock sometimes just like this, just to sort of like self regulate or something. But I'm not rocking in a really extreme or loud way in public. And so that's kind of like a very obvious and stereotypical trait that I fully relate to. I stim in a lot of different ways, but nobody ever sees that as autistic enough, because it doesn't fit with their preconceived notion of what stimming should look like, because apparently all autistic people are supposed to stim in the same way. So I think stimming is one where we all know that autistic people stim, but what actually counts as stimming is there's a huge variety of things that people do. Maybe they've also suppressed their own stims, which happens a lot through, when people are masking, and so they might start stimming in a less obvious way, like doing this kind of thing. Or, I say hair twiddling, and people say, well, everybody hair twiddles kind of thing. And it's like, well, no, the purpose of the hair twiddling is the kind of like regulation or maybe concentration. It's the purpose of it that's important. So it's not the fact that I'm twiddling my hair that makes me autistic. It's the purpose, why I'm doing that, or why I'm doing twiddling my hair as opposed to doing something more obvious. So I think stimming is a really big one. It's the really obvious one that people think about. Special interests is another one. It's a really obvious trait that the stereotype is always trains. And I know there's lots of autistic people who love trains, and I don't want to rain on their parade or anything like that. But why is it more autistic to be obsessed with trains than to be completely obsessed with the TV show Friends, for example, in the 90s? Everybody watched Friends, right? But I was obsessed with it. And when you say stuff like that, it's sometimes really hard for people to actually understand that it's not how different or weird you are. It's the kind of intensity of the interests. It doesn't matter what it is. So horses, for example, are seen as something that is very gender appropriate for girls to like. And yet there are a lot of autistic girls who maybe had the same passion about horses and the same obsession and interest that many autistic boys had about trains. And I'm using these gender stereotypes very, in a very general way, but I know that a lot of people really still hold on to this idea that autism is more of a boys thing. And so I wanted to sort of try and show the other side. Of course, you don't have to be a girl to be one, and you don't have to be a boy to be the other. I have a very kind of like liberal view of sort of gender identity in that way in terms of interests, but does that even make sense? I have a liberal view of gender identity. I don't even know what that means.
I
You know?
think I think what you're
Do you know what I'm
saying
trying
is
to say?
I think it's totally chill, because I think it's really hard when you're talking on the internet and you want to talk about a generalization without it sounding like you believe that only autistic girls have a special interest in horses. And obviously
Exactly.
I'm non-binary and also have actually recently taken up riding, funnily enough.
Really?
Yeah. But I think it's okay to talk in generalizations. It doesn't mean that you don't believe that autistic boys or non-binary people or trans people exist or are valid. You're just pointing out, when we've had so much rammed down our throats about autistic people and trains, that there are other interests that might be more likely to be enjoyed by girls, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I think actually horses might be almost verging on a stereotype. You can have a special interest in anything you like. And what makes it an autistic special interest and what makes it applicable to the diagnostic criteria is not actually what it is, but the depth of your interest and the depth of your knowledge, and maybe not being able to stop talking about it in conversation or something like that. These are the things that the autistic traits are. It doesn't actually matter what the interest is. And for me, I suppose this is a typical, maybe also with ADHD thing, where I've had a lot of really, really intense interests throughout the years, and then a couple that kind of stuck with me for, well, now decades. That's now showing my age. I've been interested in psychology now for decades. So I think it's one of those things that you can feel a bit excluded in some ways, especially because the way that it's described in the diagnostic criteria. Let me just have a. I did write about this in my book, actually. Yes. So the way that they refer to special interests in the diagnostic criteria, they say excessively circumscribed or perseverative interests, which I just think it's like, no wonder that people don't understand this, because I mean, that's a very insulting and long-winded way of saying that we are more likely to delve really deep into a topic and become very passionate about it.
It's like
And
the
that's
it's
it.
like the language of deficit rather than strength, right? Like, actually, I
Exactly.
think this is definitely one of our strengths, and I think that we all autistic people find so much joy in other people's special interests, even if they're not something we're actually interested in, just because you get that feeling that we get from that. I think
Yeah.
what you're talking about is, and I think it's really, really true, that on the one hand, we're told that the way that we stim or the way that we experience our interests is too much, right? So we calm it all down over
Hmm.
decades, and then we get diagnosed and we go, we're autistic, and then we're not enough. It's not enough. So we can't really
Yeah.
win, right?
Yeah, and I think that's especially the case for people who are both autistic and have ADHD, because we're kind of balancing that whole thing anyway. And it's kind of like, I don't know whether this is the case for many, but I personally feel that the combination of the two makes me feel like I am not autistic enough and not ADHD enough at the same time, which is a little bit frustrating, because I think the combination is like, it's its own unique thing with its own unique kind of struggles. So what I did want to talk about, though, is back to talking about traits. I think the really interesting thing that trips a lot of people up is that each trait, we think of the autism spectrum, and that's kind of a misunderstood thing, which is a topic for another video. But each trait, I think, has its own spectrum. So, for example, if you think about organization, executive functioning skills, there are autistic people who are super, super hyper organized. Their house is immaculate. Everything is in its place. The system is there. And there are autistic people who cannot organize, and they are at the other end of the sort of being good at that spectrum. And the same, I think, is true for almost every autistic trait. You can be at one extreme and the other extreme. And actually, what's important when you're looking at each trait is that you're not in the middle. So you might have noise sensitivity, or you might be a sound seeker, but you're not in that middle where the sort of average person resides. And so it can be really difficult, because you might see a lot of autistic people who have the exact opposite traits to you and think, how can I still count, because I'm the exact opposite. But that does count, because it's being at the extremes. If you imagine like a bell curve, we're sitting here and most people are sitting here.
That's such a good way of looking at it. Yeah, definitely. Funnily enough, I spent the weekend organizing my eldest autistic daughter's bedroom, which was an absolute hellhole. Um, and I am the everything in its place autistic, and she is the I don't even care. And at the end of 4 hours, when it was just, oh, it was just like soothing my soul, I went, "This is great, isn't it?" And she went, "Meh." Like
Oh.
it's an anxiety calming thing for me, and to realize that another autistic could exist in that chaos and be just fine was kind of revealing to me. I thought everybody felt that way about mess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, do you know what? I'm both of you actually. So
Oh, that
that's
must
a
be hard.
complicated place to be. Yeah.
It's been really interesting to talk about like how the more obvious traits like stimming and special interest and executive function might present, but there are also some like less obvious autistic traits that aren't necessarily part of the diagnostic criteria specifically, but are between the lines, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
And I know that you've done some talking about that on your channel, and I found that really helpful. So I wondered if you could maybe talk about some of those with us here today.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of two categories of when you say less obvious, well, not with you, that's very accusatory, sorry, but when, talking about the less obvious stuff, that there's two reasons why something might be less obvious when you're talking about autistic traits. Obviously, the first is masking. So something might be less obvious because the person is actively suppressing it. The other category of kind of the less obvious traits is the stuff that happens internally that doesn't necessarily cause a behavior or necessarily cause a behavior directly that you might understand as related to a kind of internal state. And I don't want to say all autistic people are like this, but I think a lot of us are so-called, now I always get this wrong way around, hold on, bottom-up processors as opposed to top-down. So in any given situation, we see the details first, and then we build up a picture. We build up the bigger picture. So we make sense of the bigger picture through the details, and then the kind of pattern emerges. Whereas I would argue that a lot of neurotypicals are the opposite. So let's say they enter a room, they would see the gist, the basics first, and then the details would come through later. So it's basically two ways of accessing information about the world, but that's an entirely internal experience. But you can understand why an autistic person might appear very overwhelmed all the time, because that's an exhausting way to live, isn't it? If the details come through to you first, it means that your brain has to do a lot of work in filtering things out, and this is filtering out on all the senses, visual and auditory probably for the most part, and then building a picture of what's actually going on. I'm thinking of in my head, I'm thinking of the experience of walking into kind of like a crowded restaurant or something. You know, what would be an easier way of experiencing that would be, oh, there's a sort of a general hubbub of noise, and I see tables and there's people and maybe the bar over there. Whereas my experience would be like, oh my gosh, the emergency exit sign, the toilet's over there, the bar, clink, 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 talk, 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 rattle, rattle, rattle kind of thing. And it all kind of comes in at once. And this is something that I don't really think people talk about very much, but it's absolutely crucial for, like, this is something that happens. This is your experience of the world, and it's exhausting. So, and it doesn't necessarily produce a very predictable behavior or response, because you might withdraw in that situation. You might end up having a meltdown in that situation. You might act in any number of different ways, but it's all as a result of the internal experience, which is completely unseen.
Yeah, and I think actually that's so interesting, because also I would apply that same thing to emotions for us, right? So like neurotypical people kind of more often, in my experience, being married to one,
Yeah,
process.
what's that like?
Yeah, it's a lot, but we love each other, so it works. Process the situation, then how they feel about it, right? And I have an emotion and then go, what's this for? And then figure out what it's about. So it's like
Yeah.
it's like the same for me, but with emotions, as you're describing
Mm,
in the busy bar. And I think that's also exhausting, because it's like we're constantly playing detective, right?
exactly. And just this method of information processing makes us really good at spotting patterns. And pattern spotting is I believe, an autistic trait that is very un what's the word I'm looking for?
Appreciated.
underappreciated. It's an incredible strength, and it's one that it's a part of my autism that I really love about myself. You know, like I really feel cozy, and I love it. And the only problem is, of course, that now with my special interest in psychology and learning about autism and ADHD, I'm getting uncannily good at spotting it in other people very quickly. And so I'm constantly having to remind myself, people don't want to hear, do you think you might have ADHD, like the minute I meet them or something like that. So it's like, you know, I know that it's a strength, and then I know that what I have to work on is saying, okay, to myself, is it really appropriate, is it really necessary to tell this person? And because it turns out that I don't know, I seem to attract the neurodivergent in my life. I think they're the ones who probably meet me and hang around rather than are immediately kind of put off. So it's definitely becoming a challenge for me to just say, okay, I don't need to tell everybody about all the things that I've spotted, because I love it. I love the pattern stuff, and I love being able to spot things and like create order out of the chaos of life, you know.
Maybe you'd really enjoy working as like a diagnostician of some kind.
I probably would. I'd be like, you've got this and you've got that. I mean, I do that all the time. And anyway, on TV, oh, yeah, you know, Taylor Swift's definitely got ADHD kind of thing, you know, and I just can't help myself. And I know that people get really touchy about that thing, but I like doing that.
Yeah, I
That's
think
my hobby at home.
I
Sorry,
think
Taylor
that's
Swift.
still. I have to admit, like in the last 6 months, I've just been doing a lot of unmasking, and although you're right, there is a level of appropriateness. I'm also going to really not feel bad about my excitement over things that other people don't really get why I'm excited about anymore, even if it's too much and even if it's not appropriate, because suppressing it all was killing me slowly, you know. So I think there's like a line, isn't there? Where do you find the where am I perhaps putting something on someone else that I shouldn't do, and that's a reasonable boundary, and also where am I just judging myself for my way of interacting with the world, and that's the
Exactly.
line I'm trying to navigate right now.
But if
Anyway,
you think
I
about this
digress.
particular situation, like the sort of appropriateness of saying to someone, like, do you think you might be autistic, or do you think you might have ADHD? Why, if you think about why is that actually inappropriate? Like, if you saw someone writing with their right hand and struggling, you might be like,
You left me.
did you ever think to switch it to your left hand? You know, that wouldn't be, well, I mean, that would probably be a strange thing to say in this day and age, but like that would be kind of a neutral thing. And I always try and make that connection with people, in that, you know, however many years ago, I mean, some people my age were still being forced to write with their right hands when, you know, so that would be like in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
So we're not that far off that. But now, you know, that's horrifying to us.
So the
And
notion that you might be being asked if you've got autism and ADHD being considered a negative thing rather than a neutral thing
shows about the stigma that
is
still
ableism,
exists.
essentially,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Okay, let's talk about your workbook. So obviously I
Yes.
approached you to do this interview because I was so excited that you've brought out this resource, because I think it's such a necessary resource. So you have self-published, I mean, whilst having a baby. So like, first of
Well,
all,
not at the same
I mean,
time.
not
I should
literally in the
clarify.
hospital,
No.
but you know, like in the course of 2 years, you have had a baby, you already have a toddler, and you brought out self-published a workbook. So, you know, take a moment to appreciate that. That's awesome.
Thank
Um,
you. Yeah.
so you think you're autistic, a workbook for the confused person who's just trying to figure things out. Tell me a little bit more. Let's start with what inspired you to create this resource.
Well, to be perfectly honest, it was my YouTube viewers, it was the commenters, it was the people who wrote me emails, it was people on my Discord server. Everybody who's ever written something on my, I mean, I don't read the comments as much because it's stressful, you understand the problem.
I do.
But the feedback that I've got from people is just that people are confused and they're lonely and they're isolated, and nobody is giving them any help. They get put on waiting lists for diagnosis, which can last years.
Mhm.
And it's an and it's, I guess it was also inspired by my own experience having to do everything myself and trying to figure it out. And you know, I'm a very if I want to learn something, I learn all about it and stuff like that. So I made a document for my own assessment. But I just thought, well, wouldn't it be helpful if people had a way to process all of this before their assessment, or if they are, you know, for whatever reason, going down the path of self-diagnosis or self-identification, you know, something for them to work through that is I don't want to say validating, because this isn't a book that's going to be like, well, you are autistic, or no, you're probably not. This is a book that kind of works through the categories that a diagnostician will work through anyway in an assessment. So you'll be checking all the boxes, but allows you to do it in a way that feels a little bit like chatting with a friend. So the thing that was the trigger for me going, I'm going to write this workbook now, was somebody that I knew sent me a message and said, well, I think I watched a couple of your videos. I think I might be autistic. Can we meet for a coffee? And so we talked for a couple of hours, I think. And that conversation was basically, I probably a little bit of an interrogation, but that conversation was the basis for what this workbook would become. Somebody there to chat you through all the different aspects and kind of like make sense of it all. Even if you don't come out autistic at the end of it, you've made sense of a lot of stuff in your life. And that was kind of the point of it. I also so I do cover sort of the diagnostic criteria, trying to explain that in ways that are accessible or more accessible to people. But then also there's a couple of sections on diagnosis, like, do you really want or need a diagnosis? What are the pros and cons? How to talk to other people about the fact that you think you might be autistic, because that's something that people don't know how to do. So sometimes I'm able to create resources that, even if I'm not very good at doing the social stuff on my own, I can say, okay, well, what questions do we need to ask? Who are the people that you trust in your life that you would want to tell them? What do you want to tell them about how autism affects you, or your autistic traits affecting you? And so even breaking it down like that would be helpful to me, although I've already, I've already sort of come out to people.
Where can someone go and get hold of this book?
Now, it's available on Amazon worldwide, except for Brazil, but I'm working on it. The Portuguese version is finished. The translation is finished. I just need to set up the account very shortly, but it's available on all Amazons, because they do the print on demand, and they make it very easy for people to self-publish and get it printed with a barcode.
So
So
all the
it's like
Amazons. So I will put a link
official.
to the British Amazon in the
Well,
description.
I can give you the link to the. I can give you a link that
Give
will
me all
send
the links.
somebody to whatever is their closest Amazon. So,
Perfect.
and I
So there will
know,
be
I
a
know
link.
Amazon is terrible. I know, but it was the only way that it was the only way I could do this, basically.
Yeah, that's
So,
fair. Okay, so I'm going to put a link in the description box that will take people to where they
thank
need
you.
to go to get this book. If you were meeting someone who was you like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, what one piece of advice would you give them moving forward, apart from obviously buy your book because it's awesome?
Well, I have two things to say about this. The first one is learn from other people's stories, because no matter who's out there, you'll be able to find someone with a story you can relate to. You'll be able to find an autistic person who you think, oh my gosh, it's you, it's me, we're twins. How many? I get so many emails like that saying you're literally me, and I'm like, okay. So hearing other people's stories is extremely powerful. That's number one, and number two would be to practice self-compassion and kindness to yourself frequently, not just frequently, daily, I think, because this is a really difficult time. It takes a lot of energy. I remember there was during that time there was so much confusion and doubt, and kind of like gaslighting myself and going back and forth and thinking, oh well, this is really obviously autistic. Oh no, I can't possibly be autistic. And it's exhausting. So kindness and self-compassion, and that needs to be something that is an active process, rather than just thinking, oh well, maybe I should give myself a break. No, you have to teach yourself how to do that, because I don't know, I just grew up sort of like so hard on myself, and it's liberating now to say, no, actually, I'm allowed to do this. I'm allowed to be nice to myself. I'm allowed to be kind to myself, because not everybody else is. So I have to be.
Yeah, that's so
So yeah.
true. There's so many times that I have to remind myself of that fact when I'm being meaner to myself than I would to any other human on the planet. Compassion,
Yeah.
self-compassion is just such an important part of this journey as you kind of grow and learn and hopefully experience the world in a more positive way through this realization,
Yeah. I
right?
mean, this whole process can be so therapeutic, but it brings up a lot of stuff from the past that maybe you haven't thought about in decades. And so, it can be kind of traumatic as well. It can be really difficult, and go easy on yourself. Gentleness, kindness.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Sam, and for creating this amazing resource for our community. It's great to see you, as always, and I will look forward to talking to you again soon. In the meantime, thanks for watching this video. If you like the video, hit the like button, subscribe, all that good stuff. Go check out Sam's book, go check out Sam's channels, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.